I've always been the kind of guy who doesn't mind a little distance between myself and the rest of the world. 10 years ago, I bought a 10-acre plot just outside of town. Quiet, scenic, the kind of place where the stars still show up at night, and the only thing louder than the bird song is the occasional tractor off in the distance. The roads are gravel, the neighbors are far enough apart to feel like you've got real privacy, and for a long time, life here was simple, peaceful. The land came with a perk most people didn't know about. A narrow, winding back road that cuts through the woods and connects to the main highway. It was nothing fancy, just a dirt path carved decades ago, probably by the original owner. But it made getting in and out a breeze. No traffic, no street noise, no prying eyes. That little path was part of what sold me on the property in the Bay, first place. Now technically this area falls under a homeowners association, one of those rural HOAs that formed back in the 90s when a bunch of retirees decided the community needed organization. They handled minor stuff, trash pickup schedules, road maintenance, the occasional potluck. I never paid much attention. I paid my dues on time, kept my land clean, didn't start fires or host raves, figured that was enough. I liked my solitude. Didn't cause trouble, didn't expect any, but if I've learned anything over the years, it's that peace doesn't always last, and some people just can't stand the idea of someone else being content, especially if they think they can control it. I didn't know it yet, but the back road that had been part of my daily life for a decade was about to become a battleground. It all started when Karen took over the HOA. Her name was Karen in every sense of the word. Short blonde bob, clipboard glued to her hip, and the uncanny ability to make you feel like a child who just broke. A window every time she spoke. No one really remembers voting for her. One day the old president stepped down, and the next Karen was holding meetings in the community center like she'd been elected queen of the countryside. She came in swinging. Suddenly, everything needed approval. Paint colors, garden layouts, even the length of your grass. She talked a lot about aesthetic harmony, like we were all living in a gated suburb instead of on sprawling rural properties surrounded by trees, goats, and the occasional deer. People grumbled, sure, but Karen had the bylaws printed, highlighted, and ready to wave in your face. Most folks just nodded and tried to stay off her radar. I wasn't so lucky. It didn't take her long to zero in on me and my land. More specifically, the back entrance. She called it unauthorized access, claimed it was a safety hazard and a threat to the community's security image. I explained it was part of the original property survey, showed her old maps and even the original easement documentation. She barely glanced at them. This sort of backdoor behavior sets a bad precedent, she sniffed. I didn't even know what that meant. It was a dirt path, not a drug tunnel. But Karen didn't care. She didn't like what she couldn't control in my quiet little road. That was something she couldn't micromanage. So naturally, she decided to make it her personal crusade. I should have seen it coming, but at the time I figured reason would win out. I had no idea who I was dealing with. The first time I saw the gate, I honestly thought it was a mistake. It was massive. Black wrought iron with gold-tipped spikes like something guarding the gates of an old Victorian cemetery, right in the middle of the tree-lined path I'd used every day for the last 10 years, blocking the only shortcut from my property to the main road. No warning, no notice. Just there one morning like it had grown out of the dirt overnight. Drove around it, got out, and stared at the freshly poured concrete footings, cement still curing. Signs zip-tied to the trees read, "Private property, HOA access only." I called Karen immediately. "This is illegal," I said. "That's my access road. I have deeded rights." Her voice, crisp and smug, replied, "Not according to the updated property maps. That land is part of the community greenbelt now. For safety and liability reasons, access is no longer permitted." She actually said greenbelt, like a single-lane dirt road was some kind of wildlife preserve. I met with her the next day and brought every document I had. Old maps, the original land survey, copies of the easement agreement. She skimmed the first page, then handed it back. with a bored expression. "Things change," she said, folding her arms. "This road was never properly filed with the HOA. It's non-compliant." Non-compliant. That was her favorite word. Within a week, the HOA added a chain-link fence around the wooded access point. More signs, more locks. When I protested again, they threatened to fine me for trespassing on common land. I went to a lawyer. He said the paperwork was in my favor but warned me the HOA could tie this up for months in red tape. The county was no help. Civil dispute, they called it. Meanwhile, my dad, who uses a wheelchair, was cut off from the only flat, safe road out of our property. The front entrance was steep, winding, and barely passable after storms. The back road was how the ambulance came last time he fell. Now it was behind iron bars. That's when I stopped hoping for fairness and started planning for war. What used to be a 5-minute drive to the main road turned into a 40-minute detour through winding, unpaved back roads that chewed up my tires and kicked dust into every crevice of my truck. Every errand became a chore. Every trip into town felt like I was being punished for daring to live quietly. And the worst part? My father. He's in his 70s, partially paralyzed from a stroke a few years back. We'd built this place with him in mind. Ramps, wide paths, and most importantly, quick access to the highway in case of emergency. That back entrance wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity. One night around 2 a.m., he started slurring his words and grabbing at his chest. I called 911 and ran to meet the ambulance at the front drive. But they couldn't get through right away. The main entrance was muddy, steep, and not meant for big rigs. It cost us precious minutes. He was okay in the end, thank God. But that night I realized Karen's aesthetic harmony could have killed someone. I was furious. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I tried to use the back road anyway, just once, just to make a point. I walked up to the gate, opened the latch I installed years ago, and stepped onto the path. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from the HOA, a $750 fine for trespassing on my own property. That's when I knew I couldn't play this quiet anymore. I started documenting everything. Photos of the gate, the signs, the fences, dashcam footage of my daily detour. I saved every HOA email, every voicemail, every smug letter signed by Karen's perfectly curled initials. I created a file on my computer labeled HOA War. Because make no mistake, this wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a campaign, an invasion of my rights, my land, and my sanity. And if Karen wanted to treat this like a battle, then she'd better believe I was done fighting fair. I decided to give it one last shot, the reasonable route. I scheduled a formal meeting with the HOA board, hoping that if I laid out the facts, the documents, the history of the land, maybe, just maybe, they'd see reason. Maybe this was all a big misunderstanding. I walked into the community center armed with binders of evidence and a carefully rehearsed speech. The board sat at a long plastic table, Karen front and center like a queen surveying her court. 5 others flanked her, all wearing the same tight, polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I barely got 2 minutes into my presentation before Karen interrupted me with a chuckle. "You don't look like HOA material," she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. A few of the board members snickered behind their hands. I blinked, thrown off. "I'm not here for approval. I'm here for property rights." Karen leaned back, lacing her fingers behind her head. "You see, we're working to elevate the community. Higher standards, better property values. Some adjustments are necessary. Adjustments, like sealing off legally deeded land." One of the board members, a guy named Mike who owned a landscaping company, tossed out a comment about cleaning up boundary disputes over time, and another muttered something about adverse possession laws being tricky but doable. My stomach dropped. They weren't just blocking my road to be petty. They had a plan. They wanted to steal part of my land, cut off my access long enough to claim it through adverse possession laws. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about Karen's obsession with aesthetics. It was about money. about power. My lot was one of the largest in the area. Cutting it down by even a few acres would open up opportunities for development, resale, maybe even another overpriced community park named after Karen herself. I gathered my papers and stood up, feeling their smug smiles crawl across my back as I turned away. It was never going to be a fair fight, but that was fine. If they wanted to play dirty, I could play smarter. I spent the next week in a rage I kept carefully hidden. To the outside world, I looked like I'd given up. I stopped arguing, stopped showing up at meetings, even started nodding when Karen waved at me from her perfectly manicured porch. But behind that quiet exterior, I was working, digging, researching, planning. It started with a trip to my storage shed, where I kept some of my grandfather's old documents. He was the one who originally plotted the land decades ago, before subdivisions, before HOAs, before people started thinking land should come with rules and newsletters. He'd drawn every square inch by hand. Property lines, drainage ditches, trails, and easements all marked with neat, faded penmanship. And there it was. A thin dotted line, nearly forgotten, marked Alt Access Row deeded, running from the southeast corner of the property straight to the county-maintained road. I remembered it faintly from childhood, a path we'd cleared once, way back, for logging. Overgrown now, choked with brush and roots, but still mine. More importantly, still legal. I took the map to a title specialist. They confirmed it. An easement recorded with the county but never filed with the HOA because it predated their formation. As far as the HOA was concerned, it didn't exist. But in the eyes of the law, it was as real as the road under their smug feet. That's when the plan hit me. If they wanted to block off my current road, fine. Let them. I'd give them something to admire. I went out and built a new gate near the same area they had sealed off. A flashy, over-engineered monstrosity. Welded steel, faux stone pillars, LED uplighting at night. A total eyesore designed to scream, expensive and official. I even had a fake keypad installed, and topped the whole thing with a decorative HOA-style sign. Private access, no entry. I let them see me working on it for weeks. Karen drove by at least once a day, slowing down to gawk, probably smug that I was complying. What she didn't know was that a quarter-mile deeper into the woods, I was clearing the real road. My road. I worked in secret, late at night or early in the morning. Hired a discreet land-clearing crew that didn't ask questions. We restored the old easement path from scratch. Gravel, drainage, even solar lights tucked into the brush. The path was hidden by a thicket of pine trees and a slight ridge. From the road, you'd never know it was there. I installed trail cameras and buried noise sensors near both the fake gate and the real one. If someone came poking around, I'd know before they got too close. The system fed directly to my phone, complete with motion alerts. I even mounted a weatherproof speaker in a tree, just in case I ever needed to say something. Meanwhile, I played the part of the defeated neighbor perfectly. I let myself look small. I let the HOA think they'd won. Karen was practically glowing every time she passed me in her golf cart. She even dropped by once, unsolicited, to commend me on finally respecting the order of the community. I smiled and thanked her. Inside, I was laughing, because every day they stared at that beautiful, useless gate, thinking they'd shut me down. They had no idea they were looking at a decoy. The real road, the real freedom, the real payback was already open. And they were too blinded by their own egos to see it. Let them celebrate. I was almost ready. Spring rolled in like a stage curtain lifting on the final act, and the HOA, led by none other than Queen Karen herself, decided to celebrate their so-called victory with a barbecue. Naturally, they held it right by the decoy gate. They set up folding tables, red checkered cloths, tiny American flags stuck in potted plants. Kids ran around with balloons while HOA board members strutted around like generals returning from war. Karen was front and center, holding court in a white pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, sipping something sparkly out of a wine tumbler that read, "Boss Lady in Rhinestones." She gave a speech, of course. Standing proudly in front of the gate like she'd personally welded it shut with her own bare hands. "This is what community looks like," she declared. "Security, order, pride. We've taken back what was misused and we've made it beautiful. Again. There was a round of polite claps and someone whistled. I stayed just out of sight, watching from the tree line, my phone in hand. The real show started after sunset. Karen had organized a little walking tour for some new potential buyers. She wanted to impress them, show off how safe and organized the neighborhood was under her rule. The final stop on her grand parade? The gate. With great flourish, she snipped a red ribbon they'd strung across it. The second the scissors touched the ribbon, the whole thing collapsed like a house of cards. One hinge gave out, then the faux stone pillar cracked and toppled sideways. The keypad popped off like a plastic toy, revealing it was never wired to anything. Gasps from the crowd. A couple of kids burst into laughter. Karen stood frozen, scissors eye still in hand, her mouth hanging open. Then came the voice. I tapped my phone. A hidden speaker crackled to life, echoing through the trees with cold clarity. Congratulations, you've gated off the wrong land. Karen spun in circles looking for the source. Board members scrambled. One guy dropped his lemonade. That's a decoy, I continued. The real road? It's been open for weeks. You didn't block me. You just fenced in your own arrogance. Silence fell over the group. Karen's face flushed red, then pale. She looked like a child who just realized the magician's trick had backfired. And in that moment, I knew. I hadn't just won. I'd embarrassed her on her stage with her own props in front of her carefully curated audience. The trap had sprung, and the real fun was just beginning. The very next morning, I took it public. No more quiet conversations, no more patient emails. I uploaded the drone footage I'd taken of the real access road. Clean, gravel-packed, tucked behind trees like a secret highway, to every local Facebook group and neighborhood forum within 50 miles. I included overlays from my grandfather's original land maps and county records, highlighting the pre-HOA deeded easement. Then I submitted everything, every document, every photograph, every time-stamped video, to the county land office, the zoning board, and just for fun, the local news station that loved a good neighborhood drama story. They called it The Gate to Nowhere. Ran it with a side-by-side image of Karen holding scissors in front of a collapsed structure. The drone video of her secure border lying in a heap went viral by lunchtime, but that wasn't even the knockout blow. See, the drone also captured footage from earlier that month. HOA contractors cutting into my trees, pouring cement, drilling into what was legally still my property. Their own surveillance signs, installed without a single permit, were posted directly on my side of the boundary line. I had GPS data, time-stamped photos, even receipts from the concrete supplier that listed my parcel number by mistake. The moment I handed that file to my lawyer, the tide shifted like a dam breaking upstream. The HOA was served a formal cease and desist within 48 hours. A county investigator came out to verify everything, and by the end of the week, they'd issued a $12,000 fine to the HOA for unauthorized construction, property damage, and illegal use of a recorded easement. But it didn't stop there. Karen, as acting president and primary signatory on the project, was personally fined for exceeding her authority and violating multiple municipal codes. Her name was printed right there in the legal summary report, next to phrases like trespassing, unauthorized alteration, and reckless use of HOA funds. The community's golden gatekeeper had just been caught red-handed, holding the crowbar. Neighbors who'd once silently cheered her crusade were suddenly deleting their comments, pretending they hadn't clapped at the barbecue. Board members distanced themselves overnight. One even knocked on my door to apologize. Karen, she went quiet. No speeches, no smug looks. Just a single email marked urgent, asking if we could come to a mutual understanding. I didn't respond. She had built a monument to her own control complex, right on the wrong side of the fence. And now, it was coming down brick by brick in full view of the public she tried so hard to impress. The gate was never meant to keep me out. It was always meant to trap her in. It didn't take long for the cracks to widen. Within a week of the fines and media frenzy, Karen resigned from her position as HOA president, or rather she announced she was stepping down voluntarily, citing a need to focus on her personal wellness. But everyone knew the truth. She was cornered, humiliated, and desperate to escape the storm she'd created. She tried to save face by blaming the board, claimed she'd been acting on collective guidance and was simply enforcing existing mandates. But the board didn't flinch. They tossed her under the bus so fast you could hear the tires screech. The treasurer released a statement distancing the board from any unauthorized actions taken without full consensus or legal review. Translation? She acted alone. Don't sue us. Didn't matter. The lawsuits started rolling in. A retired couple, down the street, sued over the arbitrary fines they'd paid for a mailbox paint color that Karen had declared too reflective. Another family demanded repayment for a backyard pergola Karen made them tear down, also without proper grounds. Turns out, once you shine a light on corruption, people start digging into their own closets. I watched the whole thing unfold like a front row seat to a soap opera, except it was happening in real time, across email threads, legal notices, and furious HOA meetings. As for me, let's just say things were looking up. The viral news coverage turned my property into a minor local legend. I got offers, serious offers, from buyers who wanted a slice of the land that beat the HOA. Real estate agents said the exposure had spiked interest in the area, and homes with low HOA interference suddenly became hot ticket listings. My own property value shot up nearly 30% in just 3 weeks. Funny how the same road Karen tried to erase became the feature buyers loved most. I didn't sell, of course, but I did make one small, satisfying change. Right where the real access road meets the county road, I installed a sleek, understated metal sign. No blinking lights, no padlocks, just one clean laser-engraved message: private drive, not HOA property. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but every time someone drove by, especially the board members who used to sneer from golf carts, it told them everything they needed to know. This land was mine, legally, rightfully, and no amount of petty politics or phony gates could ever change that. Karen tried to turn my life into a prison. She ended up locking herself out instead, the months that followed, the storm I'd created with the HOA faded into a quiet breeze. Things settled down, the dust cleared, and for the first time in a long time I could breathe without feeling the weight of injustice looming over me. The most important change, of course, was with my father. After everything, after all the frustration and heartache, the first time he rolled up the newly cleared access path, I thought he might break down in tears. The sight of the road, free, open, no iron gates blocking the way, seemed to lift a weight from him that I hadn't even realized he carried. I watched him, his weathered hands gripping the wheels of his chair as he looked down the now pristine, through his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You did this, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I smiled, trying to hide my own emotion. Yeah, I did. His smile was one of pure gratitude, the kind you don't see often in a man who's spent his life quietly accepting the world as it comes. But that smile, touched by the relief of knowing he could finally get to town without a 2-hour ordeal, was everything. It was worth every bit of the battle. I didn't hear from Karen again, not directly anyway. But I did start receiving anonymous letters in my mailbox. Handwritten thank you notes signed by your neighbor. They didn't say much, just a simple, "Thank you for standing up for what's right. You're not alone." It was strange, but reassuring to know that people had been watching. That I hadn't been fighting alone, even when it felt like it. Then, about 3 months later, I received a package, delivered to my front door with a note attached. The note simply read, "To the one who beat the HOA. Enjoy. New president. Your HOA." Inside the package was a bottle of wine, a nice red from a local vineyard. It wasn't much, certainly not enough to undo the damage they'd caused, but the gesture was a signal of change. The new HOA president, a quiet and professional woman who'd taken over after Karen's resignation, had apparently decided it was best to stay in their lane. The note was a bit of an olive branch, and I accepted it, with a nod to the reality that not every battle needed to be fought to the bitter end. Maybe, just maybe, some peace could be made. Now and then, when I need a reminder of how far I've come, I visit the Decoy gate. It still stands, a bizarre, crumbling monument to arrogance and ignorance. The hinges are rusting, the wrought iron flaking in the wind, the stonework chipping away from the elements. It's a shadow of its former self, an empty symbol of what happens when people forget that power is never permanent. I never intend to tear it down. It's not necessary. It serves as a reminder, to the HOA, to Karen, and to anyone else who might think they can run roughshod over people who just want to be left alone. But mostly it serves as a reminder to me that sometimes the quietest victories are the sweetest, and the peace you fought for is worth more than any gate or title could ever be.